Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of September. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. The 2015-2016 state budget is under discussion at this hour in the Knesset plenum ahead of the first reading later today. Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon expressed satisfaction with the 2,000-page proposal, which together with the accompanying economics arrangement bill includes the priorities that he fought for and believes will improve citizens' standards of living while prompting economic growth. Today's Knesset debate is expected to be lengthy and fierce, with opposition parties rallying for further changes. The vote serves as a test of the new government, which has been operating without a budget since taking office 5 months ago. U.S. President Barack Obama is just one vote away from being able to veto legislation blocking approval of the Iranian nuclear deal. Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware today announced his support for the agreement, as did his party colleague from Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, who spoke about his decision with PBS television.
Fundamentally, the decision was because you have to decide up or down on this agreement as it relates to the basic question of how do we stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, short-term and long-term. Short-term because they are just 2 to 3 months from so-called breakout, having enough fissile material for a bomb. So that weighed on me heavily. What's the best way to do that? You either have to vote for the agreement or vote against it. I think voting for it is in furtherance of the goal of preventing them from getting a nuclear weapon. There are other reasons as well that I can outline, some of them involving the constraints that are to put on this, the Iran nuclear program for the long term, but principally you get back to that basic question about stopping them from developing a nuclear weapon.
For how long?
Well, certainly even the opponents would I think, concede that that ability to constrain their program goes for a decade, if not longer. And after a decade, even after the constraints begin to be lifted, what Iran is supposed to do at that point is if they choose to develop a civilian nuclear program for nuclear power, if they do something other than that and take steps to develop a nuclear weapon, then we have a whole range of options. And one of the reasons I spent so much time on the deterrence issue is because of my concerns about the out years. From the very beginning and throughout my 8.5 years in the Senate, I've worked very hard to make sure that we take steps to secure Israel, and ultimately the backstop or the fortification for this agreement and for Israel's security is our own capability. We're the only country in the world that has the military capability to take out Iran's program today, tomorrow, and into the future. That's the ultimate backstop for Israel. I think there's a perfect alignment between what we should do for our own security and ensuring the security of Israel. I don't think they are discordant in any way. I believe the agreement enhances our national security and also enhances the security of Israel and the region.
I just finally want to ask you about, and very quickly, as we reported earlier, Democrats supporting the president are now just one vote away from having enough votes to block an attempt to override a presidential veto should it come to that. Any doubt in your mind now that supporters are going to get that additional vote?
I'd be very surprised if that vote was not forthcoming. I don't know the exact numbers or how remaining senators will vote, but I think if I had to make an educated guess, I'd say we'd have enough votes to sustain a veto.
It is premature to say President Obama's expected veto of a congressional resolution against the Iran deal will be overridden. So says veteran Israeli diplomat Yoram Ettinger while speaking with IBA's Aria O'Sullivan.
The issue is way too important to even express any pessimism or fatalism. There is still a very good chance of averting the wrath of such a reckless agreement, provided that a major mistake will be rectified, namely the mistake of instilling the misperception that this is primarily an Israeli issue. Israel supposedly calling upon its friends in the Senate and the House to support the country in face of the Ayatollahs. The reality is that this is primarily an American issue. Israel is a side show. The Ayatollahs are developing nuclear capability in order to dislocate, to remove what they call the arrogant, infidel American obstacle, the big Satan. Israel is the small Satan.
Ambassador, can you explain to us a little bit about the timetable of the voting in the Congress?
Assuming that on September 17th there will be a majority against the accord, the president then will veto. And then, and only then, the Senate and the House will have to marshal 2/3 in order to override the veto. Once you have that second vote, then it's a new ballgame. In the meantime, we may hear about new revelations about that agreement, possibly new flows of that agreement. In the meantime, we may hear more about the mischiefs of the rogue regime in Tehran. And therefore, some people who currently do vote for the agreement may change their mind, or vice versa. And therefore, it's premature at this stage to suggest what will the outcome be on September 17th, and certainly what will the outcome be on the veto override if indeed there is a rejection of the agreement and then a presidential veto.
You sound optimistic.
A Jew, by definition, has to be optimistic. How can a Jew be anything but optimistic when we watch the Jewish state today following thousands of years of Jewish history with expulsions and destructions and Holocaust and sanctions and wars and terrorism, and today we are the major ally of the U.S., not only in the Middle East, in my mind, throughout the world. Who would have assumed only a few years ago that Israel will be side by side with the U.S. as global leaders in developing, manufacturing, and launching small and medium-sized satellites? How can anybody be but mighty optimist in light of such a reality?
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has announced that he will not seek re-election for leadership of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, nor his own Fatah party. He and 18 other members resigned from the PLO Executive Committee last month in what was reportedly a bureaucratic step to facilitate the formation of a new Palestinian Congress. That move prompted the holding of new elections mid-September, even though for now Abbas intends to retain his post as president of the Palestinian Authority. A Hamas-linked media source is reporting that 2 days ago, Abbas called on Fatah members to prepare potential candidates for his eventual retirement. The 81-year-old leader has now been in office for 11 years after being elected in 2005 to a 4-year term. I am ready to meet with Abu Mazen anytime and any place. Well, that was the message from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a meeting with the Women Wage Peace activist group while using the customary Arabic name for Mahmoud Abbas. The group has been staging protests outside the Prime Minister's residence throughout the summer to mark the first anniversary of Operation Protective Edge. After members of the group told Netanyahu that the government should prioritize negotiations with the Palestinian Authority in hopes of achieving a peace agreement, he expressed his desire to return to the negotiating table. He said that he is willing to go to Ramallah or any other place to meet and hold direct negotiations without preconditions, adding that the solution of the conflict is 2 states for 2 peoples, specifically a demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the nation-state of the Jewish people. Minister of Economy Aryeh Deri is blasting Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz over natural gas issues, saying that he is guilty of a first-class intelligence failure that left Israel in the dark about the discovery of a massive reserve off the Egyptian coast this week. Deri said that it is unacceptable that while the government has been working to finalize a contentious agreement regarding its own reserves in the Mediterranean Sea, cabinet ministers were unaware that Egypt, which is a potential client, has been exploring its own offshore sites. Cairo's discovery has been described as possibly being the greatest ever found in the region and cast doubts on the viability of the current deal between the government and a U.S.-Israeli energy consortium that's been stalled due to ongoing regulatory and political disputes. Steinitz fired back, blaming dairy with failure to sign off on the gas deal and stressed the urgency to end the freeze and move the agreement forward. He added his hopes that the news from Egypt will serve as a wake-up call so that Israel will not miss the boat. The standing of Likud Knesset member Oren Chazan is in jeopardy after the police recommended that the lawmaker face criminal charges for assaulting a civil servant and for public misconduct. This follows completion of investigation into an incident dating back to October 2014 when Chazan allegedly assaulted the town manager of Ariel at City Hall during an argument over the manager's freezing of his bank account for non-payment of municipal taxes. City officials filed a criminal complaint against him at the time, which occurred before he became a member of Knesset. The police findings will now be transferred to the state prosecutor's office in the coming days. Well, there's been a bit of musical chairs at the Knesset. Former Hachnua MK Elazar Stern returns today as a member of the Yesh Atid party in place of Rabbi Shai Peron, who resigned his seat to take on a senior position as an educator in Sderot. Former Absorption Ministry Director General Oded Forer will take over for Israel Beitenu MK Sharon Gal, who has also resigned so that he can resume his work in television journalism. And Canadian-born Sharon Haskell has been sworn in as a Likud Knesset member, filling the vacancy left by Donnie Danone, who is headed off to New York to serve as the nation's ambassador to the United Nations. 2 teenage sisters were killed and 2 other people seriously injured in a head-on collision between 2 cars on Route 66 near the entrance of Moshav Midrach Oz in a Jezreel Valley. The 13 and 14-year-olds were trapped in the back seat of the car and pronounced dead at the scene. Their 45-year-old mother was evacuated by helicopter to a hospital with serious wounds, as was the 45-year-old male driver of the second car who suffered chest injuries. The Or Yerok Traffic Safety Organization is calling for the construction of a separation barrier on Route 66, saying that it has been the site of more than 200 accidents over the past decade, resulting in 30 deaths and about 700 injuries. Local soccer action will be suspended until further notice unless Economy Minister Deri authorizes the playing of matches on Saturday. 2 weeks ago, Tel Aviv Labor Court Judge Ariela Glitzer-Katz ruled that team members cannot be forced to play on the Sabbath in response to the filing of a petition from hundreds of players in the lower divisions. The judge ordered that the matches, including the National League, not be played on Saturdays until the sides meet again in court to try and resolve the matter. Until now, the Premier League has gone ahead with its schedule, but now the judge is branding those games a criminal offense that require Deri's authorization to be held. The Football Association responded by firing off a letter to the minister, warning that they will indefinitely suspend all soccer action, including youth matches, if he fails to give his approval. European officials are struggling to better coordinate efforts to cope with the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War, as asylum seekers from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other nations continue to flow onto the continent every day in search of a better life. A park in the center of Belgrade is now the site of a tent city, serving as a transit camp for many of the 2,000 people who cross into Serbia every day. Most say that they hope to go to Hungary, where some 10,000 people entered this past week alone. Police in Vienna today freed 24 Afghani teenagers between the ages of 16 and 17 from inside of a van with the doors welded closed. The Romanian driver jumped out and ran away, but he was tracked and captured. Just last week, 71 dead bodies were found in an abandoned truck in Austria. At least 11 migrants believed to be Syrians drowned after 2 boats sank after leaving Turkey for the Greek island of Kos. Many are still missing after the capsizing of the vessels. About 2,000 people a day have been making the short but perilous crossing that has so far this year claimed the lives of more than 2,500 refugees. Nearly 800 others were rescued by a Norwegian ship, most of whom are from Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and the Ivory Coast. The number of migrants sailing the sea toward Europe has already passed the 300,000 mark this year, up from 219,000 for all of 2014. Thousands of others undertake very dangerous attempts to illegally enter the United Kingdom through the Eurotunnel with France. Hundreds of travelers were stranded for hours yesterday, trapped aboard 5 Eurostar high-speed trains during a police search for migrants. Passengers on one London-bound train were forced to sit in the darkness for 4 hours while being told to remain very quiet and listen for the sound of people crawling on the roof. Well, having successfully signed its nuclear deal with world powers last month, Tehran is now engaging in diplomacy aimed at resolving the civil war in Syria. The resumption of efforts to end the conflict come in the wake of heavy battlefield losses by the government of President Bashar al-Assad this year. The United Nations envoy to Syria, Staffan de Mistura, held talks with Iranian Foreign Ministry official Hussein Amir Abdollahian at Tehran's embassy in Beirut. Neither made comments to the press after the meeting. Iran, which, like Russia, has provided the regime with military and financial support, has announced that it will present its own peace plan for Syria at the United Nations. UNESCO officials continue to mourn the loss of the Temple of Bel in Syria. The satellite images confirmed to have been destroyed by the Islamic State at the ancient city of Palmyra. The temple was more than 2,000 years old and considered as one of the most important monuments at the World Heritage Site that was seized by ISIS in May.
We know for sure that sometimes after the 27th of August, most likely on the 30th of August, this temple was blown up by explosives. Then we have been able to get a picture, a satellite image dating from yesterday that shows the extent of the damage. The resolution is not extremely high, but it's high enough to be able to tell that unfortunately the main cell, the main part of the temple is gone, with the exception of one part of the portal, the entrance to the temple. It was dedicated to a local god, Bel, but during Byzantine times it was turned into a church, and then with the arrival of the Arabs it was turned into a mosque. So it has continued to, in fact, perform its role of sort of main focus of the religious life of the people of that part of the world across their interpretation. So this is why it has this profound humanistic meaning which goes beyond sort of historic and even aesthetic aspects.
The latest unrest in Beirut involved the occupation of the Ministry of the Environment by protesters angry over a garbage disposal crisis amid a rising wave of fury over Lebanon's paralyzed political system. Activists from the grassroots You Stink anti-government movement demanded the resignation of Environmental Minister Mohammed al-Mahnouk, while they remained holed up for 9 hours inside the building, while hundreds of others clashed with riot police outside by throwing rocks, bottles, and lighted fireworks. There has been an unprecedented mobilization by civil society groups in recent weeks, with thousands of disaffected Lebanese pouring into the streets to voice their outrage over widely perceived corruption and incompetence in the sectarian political system. More than 2 decades after the end of the civil war, the country still contends with daily power cuts and frequent water shortages while struggling to cope with the influx of over 1 million refugees from the conflict in neighboring Syria. Turning now to the arts, and Israeli director Amos Gitai's new film, Rabin the Last Day, is set to debut at the Venice Film Festival, which opens tonight. The film depicts the director's interpretation of events leading up to the assassination of former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, his subsequent investigation of the murder, and the trial of assassin Yigal Amir. Gitai tried to capture the time that he describes as a dark and frightening world, a subculture of hate fueled by hysterical rhetoric, paranoia, and political intrigue. Here now are a few scenes from the Israeli entry.
פגיעת כדור ליד עמוד השדרה, עם פגיעה בעמוד השדרה.
יבואו עליו כל הקרנות, אמן ואמן!
חור בגב שריטש את הטחול.
לפי התורה, אם יהודי מוסר את העם שלו ואת המדינה שלו בידי האויב, חובה להרוג אותו. יש חוקים בארץ, לא? עם שלם בוחר בבן אדם, אתה מחליט שצריך להרוג אותו?
בכיכר מלכי ישראל היו יריות לפני שעה קלה. עד כה ידוע שראש הממשלה נפגע ופונה לבית החולים איכילוב בתל אביב.
השתלשלות האירועים ב-4 בנובמבר.
עשיתי את כל מה שניתן לעשות וכל מה שצריך לעשות.
ואני לתומי חשבתי שהתפקיד שהתאמנתם עליו היה להגן על ראש הממשלה. אמרו לך מראש איזה ציר יהיה ציר פינוי בבית חולים בשעת חירום?
מה היה קורה אם הוא היה מגיע 2 דקות קודם לכן?
לא הייתה כניסה לא ממערב ולא ממזרח. רק לאנשים מאושרים שאכן בדקנו והם נכנסו.
פרט לאנשים מאושרים כמו הרוצח למשל?
תרשו לי לומר שאני גם מתרגש. אני רוצה להודות לכל אחת ואחד מכם שהתייצב כאן כנגד האלימות ובעד השלום.
On a far happier note, the lead guitarist for Guns N' Roses, Ron Bumblefoot Thal, is in the country. The talented Jewish performer is also a singer, songwriter, producer, and sound engineer who's a frequent visitor to Israel. This time he's here for a series of concerts with the local band Orphaned Land, led by Yossi Sassi. Bumblefoot, whose original name is Ronald J. Blumenthal, is involved in multiple charities and philanthropies and will be working with underprivileged Israeli children this week. He'll also be holding guitar workshops at Beit HaYotzer in Tel Aviv until the 5th of the month. Local talented guitar players can head over to the venue in the Tel Aviv port later tonight at 7 o'clock for a masterclass workshop with a Guns N' Roses band member, who I understand also imparts meaningful and entertaining life lessons throughout the evening, which is also available and open to the public. In financial news, the shekel today put in a mixed performance against all major foreign currencies, while share prices in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up across the board. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. Now turning to the weather, and September is certainly getting off to a steamy start, with temperatures expected to be just as unseasonably hot tomorrow as they've been so far. Here's the forecast to home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow when I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. We now leave you with Bumblefoot's rendition of Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, or the Hope. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.